London at night was always magnificent, yet the penthouse on the 45th floor of the Sinclair building felt unbearably cold. Grace Bennett stood before the vast glass window, the city lights reflecting in her deep blue eyes. She held a cup of tea that had long gone cold, yet she made no effort to drink it. In front of her, on the table, lay a sheet of paper with two bolded words at the top: divorce agreement. Her hands trembled as her fingers traced the edge of the paper. Never had she thought the day would come when she would have to sign it. But what other choice did she have? Grace had loved Nathaniel Sinclair with all her heart. From the early days when he was just an ambitious young entrepreneur to the moment he rose to become the most powerful CEO in London, she had always stood by his side. They had once shared a love story that felt like a fairy tale, sweet, passionate, and as radiant as a summer sunset. But now that love had turned cold, just like the tea in her hands. Nathaniel was still Nathaniel, still handsome, still successful, but he was no longer the man she had fallen in love with. He had grown distant, consumed by billion-dollar deals, endless late-night meetings, and the dinners she had waited for in vain. He had forgotten her, forgotten the love they once had. She had tried, she had waited, she had been patient to the point of deceiving herself into believing things would get better. But this Valentine's Day, he hadn't even sent her a single message. A tear silently fell onto the page. Was this truly the end? Suddenly, the sound of the door opening broke the silence. She flinched and turned around. Nathaniel stood there, tall, striking in his dark suit, but with a weary face and empty eyes. She wondered, how long had it been since they had truly looked at each other? "You're still awake?" His voice was hoarse, exhausted from the long day. Grace didn't answer. She simply looked at him, an unspeakable pain swelling in her chest. Perhaps tonight would be the last time they were still husband and wife. Welcome to Soul Stories Puker. Life can be overwhelming, but here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow, means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a yes in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter together. Chapter 1. A blissful past, a love that burned bright, a love beyond status. Do you believe in fate? Nathaniel's deep voice resonated through the stillness of the small cafe by the Thames. The London night shimmered, streetlights casting their reflections on the water, forming ethereal streaks of light like 1,000 twinkling stars. Grace Bennett gently stirred her coffee, a soft smile gracing her lips. She was born into luxury, the only daughter of the Bennett family, one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in England. She had everything: wealth, status, prestige, but no one had ever made her heart race like Nathaniel Sinclair. He was nothing like the privileged men she had met before, those who lived off their family's fortune, indulging in luxury without ever striving for anything themselves. Nathaniel had built his career from nothing. He had no influential family to pave the way for him, no powerful connections to orchestrate his success. All he had was a sharp mind, an unyielding ambition, and a heart that knew no limits. And that was what had drawn Grace to him from the very first moment. She remembered the first time they met. It was at a lavish charity gala, where successful businessmen and the elite gathered to flaunt their wealth and status. Grace never cared for such events. She had never felt at home in the world of extravagance and pretense. But that night she met Nathaniel. He was different from everyone else in the room. While others were busy networking for power and money, Nathaniel stood in a quiet corner, his sharp eyes observing everything. He wasn't there to boast. He was there to seek investment for his small, struggling startup. Back then, his company was nothing, unrecognized, unsupported, unheard of. But when he spoke to her about his dreams, about building a technology empire that could change the world, Grace was utterly captivated. For the first time in her life, she met someone who didn't care about her status or her name. He saw her for who she truly was, and she knew then that she had met the man who would change her life forever. Their love didn't happen instantly. At first, Grace was just a friend, a confidant who listened to Nathaniel as he navigated the hardships of building a company. But day by day, she realized she was falling for him. She loved the way he persevered, even when no one believed in him. She loved the way he worked tirelessly, willing to sacrifice everything to build his future. She loved the fire in his eyes when he spoke about what he believed in. And Nathaniel loved her too. Not because of her wealth, not because she was a Bennett. He loved her because she was Grace, a strong, intelligent woman who wasn't afraid of challenges. They had the most beautiful days of their lives together. Simple dates at small cafes instead of extravagant restaurants. Late-night conversations about their dreams and the future they wanted. Moments when a single glance was enough to know they belonged to each other. Nathaniel wasn't a perfect gentleman, but he loved her with everything he had. And Grace never regretted choosing him. But their love wasn't just romance. It was a journey filled with trials. Grace wasn't just Nathaniel's lover. She became his partner, the one person who believed in him when the world turned its back. When his company struggled, she didn't hesitate to use her family's influence to help him. She introduced him to investors, people a young entrepreneur like him could never have reached alone. She used her media expertise to bring attention to his company. She even stood against her family when they opposed her relationship with someone they deemed unworthy. But Grace didn't care. She knew Nathaniel never needed her wealth. All he needed was a chance, and she gave it to him. They endured failures together. They celebrated their first big contract together. And one night, under a sky full of stars, Nathaniel looked into her eyes and said, "Grace, I wouldn't have come this far without you." And she believed their love would never change. But she was wrong. The company grew. Nathaniel became busier. The mornings they used to share turned into empty spaces beside her when she woke up. The evening strolls they once enjoyed became late-night meetings that stretched until dawn. The loving texts that once made her heart race dwindled into short, distant messages. "I'm busy. We'll talk later." At first, Grace thought it was just a rough phase, that once things settled, he would return. She waited. For years she waited, but it never ended. He no longer looked at her the way he used to. Gone were the captivated stares when she spoke. Gone were the gentle smiles that once lit up their moments together. Gone were the little gestures that made her feel like she was his world. She had once been everything to him, but now work was his everything, and Grace's heart began to break, piece by painful piece. Chapter 2. Grace's Loneliness. Their penthouse remained as lavish as ever, crystal chandeliers casting shimmering light, luxurious furniture arranged to perfection, every piece of decor an emblem of opulence. But it was no longer a home. Once Grace had felt warmth the moment she stepped inside. The gentle scent of orchids, Nathaniel's favorite, lingered in the air. Golden lights bathed the space in a soft glow, and their laughter once echoed through the grand rooms. Now, only suffocating silence remained. She remembered when Nathaniel used to hold her hand in the kitchen, cooking together, sharing smiles as if they were the only two people in the world. She remembered the evenings they sat side by side, sipping wine, exchanging stories about their day. But those moments had long faded. Grace had tried everything to save their marriage. She believed that if she put in enough effort, if she did something special, Nathaniel would notice and things would change. She spent the entire afternoon preparing the perfect dinner. She carefully selected the freshest ingredients. Medium rare steak, just the way Nathaniel liked it. Creamy mushroom soup, the dish he often had when working late. A bottle of red wine imported from Italy, the one he once said paired perfectly with beef. She meticulously set the table. Fine porcelain plates, crystal glasses gleaming under candlelight. She straightened the chairs, neatly folded the napkins, then stepped back to admire her work. The table was set on the balcony, offering a breathtaking view of London at night. A soft breeze carried the scent of roses from the small garden she had tended herself. The city lights reflected off the glass railing, painting a picture that was both magnificent and heartbreakingly cold. She sighed, poured 2 glasses of wine, and sat down to wait. 7 p.m. Grace adjusted her hair, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her dress. She checked her phone. No messages. Maybe Nathaniel was on his way. Maybe he wanted to surprise her. 8 p.m. She glanced at the steak on the table. It was still warm but no longer steaming. She poured herself another glass of wine, taking a small sip. The phone remained silent. He still wasn't home. 9 p.m. The screen finally lit up. Nathaniel, I'm in a meeting. Don't wait for me. Just one sentence, no apology. Grace set the phone down, her expression devoid of surprise or anger. She was used to this. She had once hoped, once believed that if she just tried a little harder, Nathaniel would realize. But perhaps she had been wrong from the very beginning. She lifted her glass, her gaze drifting to the distant skyline. Today was their 4th wedding anniversary. Did he even remember? Grace wasn't sure anymore. She remembered when they used to talk for hours without growing tired. They would stay up late in small cafes by the Thames, discussing everything, from Nathaniel's bold business ideas and the projects he was passionate about to trivial daily musings. Whenever Nathaniel spoke about his dreams, his eyes lit up with an undeniable fire. Grace could listen for hours, not because she had to, but because she loved how much he believed in what he was doing. But now, their conversations lasted mere seconds, often filled with nothing but suffocating silence. She decided to try one more time. When Nathaniel stepped out of the dressing room, she was already waiting, dressed in an elegant white dress, her hair neatly tied up. She wasn't hoping for a compliment. She only wanted a little of his time. Nathaniel adjusted his tie as she placed a gentle hand on his arm. Can you come home early tonight? Her voice was soft, filled with quiet longing. He hesitated for a brief moment, and for that fleeting second, she allowed herself to hope. But then, he grabbed his car keys, his voice void of emotion. I'll try, but I might be busy. Grace let her hand fall away. She wasn't disappointed anymore. She wasn't even angry. She just smiled faintly and lowered her gaze to her shoes. You're busy. That phrase had become his standard response, repeated so often it no longer surprised her. He was too busy to have dinner with her, too busy to remember the last time they had gone for a walk together, too busy to notice the way her eyes dimmed every time he said those words. Grace never resented him for being ambitious. She had once admired his relentless drive, had fallen in love with his passion, but she never thought success would come at the cost of being forgotten. Nathaniel no longer saw her. He was still there, but he no longer belonged to her. She silently watched as he stepped through the door. The door clicked shut. Another day passed without him. Grace sat in their usual cafe, staring at her untouched cappuccino. Outside, London bustled with life, but for her, the world had shrunk down to a marriage she was the only one holding on to. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen before finally typing, Grace, what are you doing? She set the phone down, resisting the urge to stare at the screen. 5 minutes. No reply. She glanced around the cafe, watching couples laughing, talking, holding hands as if nothing could tear them apart. A sharp pang twisted in her chest. She took a deep breath and sent another message. Grace, I want to take a walk with you tonight. Just for a little while. When was the last time they had taken a walk together? Had it been over a year? Back when Nathaniel would still reach for her hand, pull her close, whispering sweet words into the night. She pressed her lips together. Now even a simple response from him felt like a luxury, a hopeless wait. 1 hour passed, 2 hours, the entire afternoon. Grace kept checking her phone. The screen showed 2 words, read. But no reply. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes locked onto the cold, indifferent text. Nathaniel wasn't too busy to reply. He simply no longer cared. She let out a soft laugh, a bitter, self-mocking sound. She had been a fool to keep hoping. She remembered the old days when they still felt like a real couple, when he would text her good morning, even though they would see each other in just a little while, when he would call just to ask if she had eaten, despite being too busy to take a lunch break himself, when he would reply to her messages immediately, even joking, I will always answer you before even my most important client. Grace bit her lip, a dull ache settling in her chest. That was in the past. Now she was no longer his priority. Maybe. She never truly was. Grace picked up her phone once more. This time she wasn't expecting anything. She just wanted to write something she had kept in her heart for too long. Grace, do you remember the last time we went on a date? I miss those days. She hit send. Her screen lit up. Read, but no response. Grace let out a small, hollow laugh and set the phone down on the table. She wouldn't text him again. For the first time in months, Grace told herself she wouldn't send another message. If Nathaniel still cared, he would reach out to her. And if he didn't, she would accept the truth on her own. But even as she made that decision, her heart ached. Because deep down, Grace knew sometimes the most painful thing wasn't the unanswered messages. It was realizing that the person you love no longer wants to answer at all. The penthouse was silent in the London night. Grace opened her eyes, staring at the dark ceiling. She couldn't sleep. Igbajirat. She turned onto her side, pulling the blanket over her shoulders, but the emptiness inside her refused to fade. Had Nathaniel come home yet? Quietly, she sat up, slipped on a thin cardigan, and stepped downstairs. She walked toward Nathaniel's office, the place he often retreated to when he came home late. She pushed the door open. Darkness, no glow from a laptop screen, no sound of typing, no Nathaniel. Grace stood frozen at the doorway, staring into the empty room. He hadn't even come home. She didn't need to call him to know the answer. She had heard it hundreds of times. I have work at the office. It didn't matter if it was 10 p.m., 1 a.m., or even 3 a.m. He always had work at the office. At first, Grace used to hope that he would explain, that there would be a reason that made sense. But over time, she stopped asking. Because every time she did, Nathaniel would only frown, sighing as if she were bothering him. You're overreacting, Grace. I'm just working hard for our future. Why can't you understand? Every time she expressed her disappointment, he treated it like a nuisance. She no longer knew what to say. Some days she wanted to scream, Nathaniel, do you even love me anymore? But she swallowed the words, because she already knew the answer. She didn't need him to say it, she could feel it. He was still her husband, but he no longer belonged to her. Grace turned away, walking silently toward the living room. She curled up on the sofa, hugging her knees, staring out at the city lights still twinkling in the distance. Something between them had broken. Not from a fight, not from a sudden tragedy, but from the small cracks that had built up over time. The unanswered messages, the dinners eaten alone, the conversations that lasted only seconds, their gazes meeting briefly but with no warmth left. The invisible wall she had tried so hard to break through. But now, she no longer had the strength. Grace leaned her head against the couch, realizing she had never felt this lonely before. The penthouse was too big, too empty. Or maybe it was her heart that was truly empty. Chapter 3, Breaking Point, the Charity Gala. The ballroom had never looked more magnificent. The Charity Gala, meticulously planned by Grace for months, was executed flawlessly. Crystal chandeliers hung high, casting a dazzling glow over the vast space, making it shimmer like a sky full of stars. Classical music floated through the air, blending with the soft, luxurious scent of imported candles, creating an atmosphere both elegant and extravagant. Every table was draped in pristine ivory linens, adorned with white roses in gleaming crystal vases. Fine wine had been poured into delicate glasses, swirling under the warm light. London's most powerful business figures engaged in lively conversation, laughter and toasts echoing through the grand hall. Grace walked among them, radiating effortless poise. She had been looking forward to this night, not just because it was an important event, but because she had wanted Nathaniel to be here with her. She had carefully chosen the wine he liked, the music he often listened to. She had thought that if he came, maybe he would feel at ease. Maybe he would smile at her. Maybe, just once, he would look at her the way he used to. But he didn't come. Grace kept her smile intact, exchanging pleasantries with esteemed guests, yet her gaze flickered toward the entrance again and again. Where was Nathaniel? Before leaving the house, she had texted him, Grace, I hope you'll come. This is important to me. No response. As the event neared its start, she sent another. Grace, can you make it? Still no response. When all the guests had taken their seats, she tried calling. The ringtone echoed, but no one picked up. She stared at her phone screen, the familiar wave of disappointment washing over her, so familiar now that she didn't even feel the pain anymore. She knew where Nathaniel was, at his office, or worse, he had completely forgotten. She wanted to be angry, but instead, all she felt was emptiness. Grace moved through the ballroom, the center of attention wherever she went. Her deep crimson evening gown hugged her curves in a way that was regal, yet effortlessly refined. The silk fabric cascaded with every step, catching the golden light like fine wine shimmering in a crystal goblet. Her long hair was styled in soft waves, each strand falling as if sculpted by an artist's hand. Her eyes, lined with precision, held a sharpness that masked the loneliness buried beneath them. Her lips painted in a bold shade of red, the color of passion, of power, but also of shattered dreams. Grace had always been the kind of woman who captured attention, but tonight she was more radiant than ever. Men whispered among themselves about her elegance, about the quiet strength she exuded. Women admired her confidence. Some even envied the perfection she seemed to embody. But no one knew that beneath all the glamour, she felt nothing but emptiness. No one knew she had spent the entire evening waiting for Nathaniel. No one knew she had searched for him in every guest who entered the room. No one knew how much she had hoped, but he wasn't here, and that hurt more than anything. Grace's fingers brushed against the diamond ring on her left hand. A memory surfaced. Nathaniel, holding her hand beneath a golden sunset, whispering that he would never make her wait. That promise now felt like a distant echo, spoken by a man she no longer recognized. She had waited for him all night, had wished for a fleeting moment of magic, for him to walk in, to seek her out in the crowd, to look at her the way he used to remember that she still mattered. But there was no such moment. She let her hand drop, her expression cooling ever so slightly, her smile becoming just a little more flawless. If he no longer looked at her the way he once did, she would not let him see her pain either. Grace lifted her wine glass to her lips, taking a slow sip. Whether Nathaniel was here or not, the night continued. She still had to shine, even if her heart was shattering beneath the dazzling lights of the grandest ballroom in London. Just as Grace struggled to suppress her disappointment, a deep, confident voice sounded beside her. "Grace Bennett, you are always the center of attention." The voice was rich and smooth, snapping her back to reality. She turned. Sebastian Hayes. He stood there, tall, striking, with sharp eyes that held a flicker of amusement. Sebastian was a man no one could ignore, a successful businessman, dangerously charismatic, the kind of man London's press often called the deadly charmer of the corporate world. Not only was he one of the biggest competitors of Sinclair Enterprises, but he had also never hidden his interest in Grace whenever they crossed paths at social events. And tonight was no exception. She could feel his gaze fixed on her, not just because she looked stunning, but because he had been watching her for a long time. Sebastian smirked, a smile that was both playful and laced with something more dangerous. "Would you like to dance?" He extended his hand toward her, his invitation unhurried, confident. Grace hesitated. The attention of the room was already shifting toward them. She knew that if she accepted, by tomorrow morning, every financial newspaper in London would be talking about it. She didn't want to be the subject of gossip. She didn't want to give anyone a reason to drag her name through the headlines, or worse, to use this against Nathaniel. Not that he would care. Her eyes swept over the ballroom, searching, hoping. Nathaniel was still nowhere to be seen. No message, no explanation, no sign that he would show up at all tonight. A bitter taste rose in her throat, as sharp as the wine she had been drinking alone. She had spent the entire evening waiting for the man who should have been by her side, but he hadn't come, and now she was done waiting. Grace took a slow breath, then placed her hand into Sebastian's. His touch was warm and firm, so different from the coldness she had grown used to in her marriage. "All right." Her voice was unnervingly steady. She knew she was making a bold choice, but why should she care? Nathaniel hadn't cared about her in a long time. The ballroom continued to buzz with conversation, the clinking of glasses and laughter filling the grand space. But for Nathaniel, the world stopped the moment he stepped inside. Grace. She stood in the center of the ballroom, breathtakingly beautiful. Her deep crimson gown clung to her silhouette, the open-back design revealing just enough to make her look like a masterpiece bathed in candlelight. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves. Her ocean blue eyes held something distant, something that made his chest tighten. But none of that compared to the real reason he couldn't breathe. She was with another man, Sebastian Hayes, a man who had everything a dangerous rival needed: charm, power, and most of all, an undeniable interest in Grace. Nathaniel watched as Sebastian held her hand, leaned in to whisper something into her ear, and she laughed. Laughed. That smile. How long had it been since he had seen it? A sharp bitterness clawed at his chest. He had missed too much. He had left her alone for too long, and now someone else was standing closer to her than he was. For the first time in a long time, Nathaniel felt fear. He couldn't allow this. He wouldn't allow this. Nathaniel moved. Grace had just placed her hand on Sebastian's shoulder, about to step into the dance. When she felt it, a warmth at her back, a presence she knew instantly. Before she could react, a strong hand gripped her waist, firm, unyielding, pulling her out of Sebastian's arms. Nathaniel. Grace's breath caught. She turned, locking eyes with him, steel gray eyes burning with restrained fury, laced with something even deeper: jealousy. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to them. Nathaniel's grip on her waist tightened ever so slightly, a silent declaration. And then his voice, low and commanding, sliced through the air. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm yet dangerously possessive. "But this is my wife." A hush swept through the ballroom. Sebastian arched a brow, a knowing smirk curling at the edge of his lips. But he didn't protest. Grace could feel the tension thickening around them, feel the rise and fall of Nathaniel's chest, his barely contained anger, his undeniable claim on her. She stood frozen, staring at the man who had ignored her for so long. And now, here he was. Nathaniel Sinclair, the man who had never shown up for her, never had time for her, was now standing here, holding on to her, declaring her as his in front of everyone. What was she supposed to feel? Anger, sadness, or heartbreak? Nathaniel hadn't attended a single one of her events in years. But now when he saw her with another man, he suddenly decided to show up. She didn't know whether to be furious or devastated. The entire ballroom watched in anticipation, waiting for her reaction. Nathaniel refused to let go, his gaze locked onto hers, unreadable yet filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time. For the first time in forever, she saw jealousy. She saw possessiveness. And beneath it all, she saw pain. But was it too late? Grace swallowed hard, forcing down the emotions threatening to consume her. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice devoid of the warmth it once held. Nathaniel hesitated for the briefest second before answering, his voice so low only she could hear. "I'm here for you." Grace blinked, a sharp ache piercing through her chest. Now finally he realized what he was losing. But was there still time left to fix it? Chapter 5. Change or just a fleeting moment. The charity gala had ended, but its echoes lingered in Grace's mind like a cold blade pressed against her heart. She didn't know what she had expected. Maybe deep down she had hoped that Nathaniel's late arrival could save something. Maybe she had wanted to believe that when he pulled her away from Sebastian, when he declared, "This is my wife," it was a sign of awakening. But as the doors of their vast penthouse shut behind them, all that remained was an unbearable silence. Grace turned away from the door, letting the emptiness consume her. Nothing had changed. Nathaniel was still Nathaniel. No words were spoken. They simply stood there, two strangers bound together by a marriage that had long lost its meaning. Nathaniel was still in his pristine suit, his tie loosened, his eyes distant and unreadable. He reached up to unfasten his cufflinks, but he didn't look at her. No explanation, no apology, just silence. It weighed down on Grace like a suffocating force. She had thought there would be a conversation. She had thought he would say something, anything, a reason, an apology, a sign that he cared. But Nathaniel said nothing. He was used to not explaining himself. He was used to leaving her behind and returning as if nothing had happened. She was tired of it. The sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floor echoed through the hollow space. She removed her diamond earrings, placing them on the dressing table with a small but sharp clink. Her fingers traced the soft silk of her gown. A perfect dress, a perfect appearance, a perfect image of Nathaniel Sinclair's wife. But it was all just a facade. She lifted her gaze to the mirror. A woman stared back at her, stunning, elegant, but her eyes were empty. Gone was the light of dreams. Gone was the spark of hope. All that remained was a weariness with no end in sight. She no longer felt heartbreak, only emptiness. Nathaniel stood behind her, watching her reflection. But Grace didn't turn around. She no longer wanted to look at him, because she had realized something. Her love had been dying for a long time, a silent night. Grace made her way to the kitchen, intending to get a glass of water. She hadn't expected to see Nathaniel there. But as she stepped inside, she saw his tall figure standing in the warm glow of the kitchen lights. 2 wine glasses sat on the counter, filled with deep red wine. Grace hesitated at the doorway, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice calm. Nathaniel turned, his piercing eyes locking onto hers. "I thought we could sit and have a drink together." His voice was controlled, steady. She glanced at the glasses. A familiar scene, one they had once shared on countless nights back when their world had been just the two of them. Nathaniel picked up one glass and stepped closer, offering it to her. Grace slowly reached for it. Their fingers brushed. A fleeting touch, a touch that now felt unfamiliar. She lifted the glass, swirling the wine under the light. "So, what happened, Nathaniel?" Her voice was soft but devoid of warmth. "What suddenly made you want to spend time with me?" Nathaniel hesitated, just for a second. "I realized," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "that I let work pull me too far away." Grace let out a quiet, bitter laugh. She shook her head, lifting her gaze to meet his. "No, Nathaniel. Work didn't pull you away." She tilted her head slightly, her voice unwavering. "You chose it over me." Nathaniel stilled. Grace placed the untouched wine glass on the counter. "And now that it's too late, you suddenly remember that I exist?" Her tone was eerily calm. Nathaniel opened his mouth, to protest, to defend himself. But he had no excuse, because she was right. He had chosen work over her. He had let her slip through his fingers, ignored her, neglected her for years. And now, only when he realized he was losing her, he wanted to fix it? But she wasn't the same woman anymore. She wasn't the woman who would wait in endless silence, hoping for a man who had forgotten her. Nathaniel's eyes darkened with unspoken emotions. He watched her, studied her, as if searching for the woman who used to look at him with love. But she was no longer there. Grace met his gaze, but there was no warmth left in her eyes. Then, without another word, she turned away, leaving behind the untouched glass of wine, leaving behind what remained of their love. Chapter 6. A New Path. Entering her room, Grace opened her laptop, scrolling through her emails out of habit. A flood of event invitations, business reports, and thank you notes from partners filled her inbox. But then, a particular name caught her eye. Madison and Company. She froze, her heart clenched. Just for a second. Madison and Company. She had heard of them before, one of the most prestigious media corporations in New York, known for working with the world's largest brands. Grace took a slow, deep breath before clicking on the email. Subject: opportunity with Madison and Company, Director of Strategic Communications in New York. Dear Ms. Bennett, we have been following your work for years and are incredibly impressed by your achievements in strategic communications. With your expertise and vision, we believe you would be an invaluable asset to Madison and Company as we continue to expand. We would like to formally invite you to take on the role of Director of Strategic Communications at our headquarters in New York. This is an opportunity to lead high-impact international projects, work in a dynamic environment, and receive an attractive compensation package. We look forward to your response. Best regards, Jonathan Caldwell, Human Resources Director, Madison and Company. Grace read the email once, twice, then a third time. Her mind was blank. They wanted her to move to the U.S. They wanted her to take on a leadership role, an opportunity that anyone in her field would dream of. Under normal circumstances, she wouldn't have even considered it, because she couldn't leave London, because she couldn't leave Nathaniel. But this time, she had no reason to stay. She made her decision. She was leaving. Chapter 6, The Divorce Proposal. Grace sat quietly in her office, the soft golden glow of the lamp casting a warm light over her face. Yet it could not hide the exhaustion in her eyes. In front of her lay a pristine white divorce agreement, neatly placed on the dark wooden desk. The pen in her hand trembled slightly. She had written countless proposals, signed dozens of important contracts, but this time, every stroke of the pen felt like a blade slicing through her heart. Taking a deep breath, she steadied her grip. If she was leaving, she couldn't afford to leave any reason to turn back. She didn't want pleas, arguments, or painful negotiations. She didn't want money. She didn't want assets. She didn't want compensation. She just wanted freedom. She wanted to live for herself. Nathaniel could keep everything that belonged to him: the company, the luxurious penthouse, the expensive cars. Everything except her. The only thing she would take with her was herself. Her gaze swept across the room. This room. It had once been the place where she and Nathaniel sat together for hours, mapping out their dreams for the future. It had once been the place where he would wrap his arms around her from behind, chuckling softly as he watched her lost in her work. It had once been the place where he would press gentle kisses to her hair, whispering sweet words that made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. Now it was nothing but an empty space. No more laughter, no more warmth, no more love. Grace tightened her grip around the pen. It was over. She lifted the pen to the paper and began to write. I, Grace Bennett, agree to divorce Nathaniel Sinclair. Each word cut deeper than the last. She remembered the long nights she spent waiting for him to come home, only to be disappointed. She remembered the mornings she woke up alone in a cold, empty bed. She remembered all the times she tried to hold on to him, only to be met with silence. Stroke by stroke, letter by letter, she bled onto the page. The final words settled into the document. A single tear fell. She stared at the stain it left, but she didn't wipe it away, because this would be the last time she cried for Nathaniel. She folded the divorce papers into an envelope and placed it gently on the dining table. Beside it, she slipped the wedding ring from her finger and set it atop the papers. The diamond glinted under the light, a symbol of the love she had once cherished. She had once thought she would wear it forever, but now there was no reason to keep it anymore. Grace sank into the sofa, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea as she waited. She no longer cared if Nathaniel came home early or late. She no longer waited for miracles. She was done waiting. Chapter 7, The Final Goodbye. Nathaniel stepped into the penthouse, his leather shoes making deep, steady sounds against the wooden floor. Everything seemed the same, but it wasn't. The air in the house felt heavier than usual. The silence was deafening. He entered the living room and found her standing by the window, cradling a cup of tea that had long gone cold. He cleared his throat, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "You're still awake?" Grace didn't answer. She simply looked at him, her eyes unreadable, filled with an emotion so heavy that even she couldn't name it. Then she turned away. His gaze drifted downward. A white envelope lay neatly on the table, and beside it, her wedding ring. The diamond shimmered under the light, but to Nathaniel it looked lifeless. His chest tightened. A sense of unease clawed at his ribs as he reached for the envelope. The first words on the page hit him like a punch to the gut. Divorce agreement. Nathaniel froze. His hands trembled, but the weight crushing his heart was even worse. Slowly he turned toward her. She was still standing by the window, her delicate silhouette reflected in the glass. She didn't say anything. No accusations, no tears. Just a silence so cold and vast it felt like an abyss between them. And then he understood. She had given up. Nathaniel gripped the document tighter, his expression darkening. "No!" His voice was hoarse yet firm. "Grace, you can't do this." She finally turned to face him. Her eyes were calm, Not angry, not broken, just done. I can, she said softly, and I will. She stepped toward him, but not to reach for him, not to comfort him like she used to. Instead, she picked up the ring and placed it in his palm. His hand felt ice cold. Grace! He said her name as if saying it could make her stay, but she didn't stop. Nathaniel panicked. He wasn't used to this feeling. Losing control. Nathaniel Sinclair, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, a man who controlled everything in his life. For the first time, he felt fear. He was going to lose her. He was going to lose the only woman who had ever loved him for who he was, not for his money, not for his power. His grip tightened around the papers, his voice cracking. Grace, do you really want nothing from me? She gave him a small, bittersweet smile. Number, I came to you for love, and now I leave for the same reason, because the love I had for you is gone. Her words sliced straight through his soul. Nathaniel had never been good at expressing emotions, but in this moment, he felt like he was dying. Grace, give me a chance. She shook her head. Nathaniel, I gave you so many chances. I can change. He stepped forward, desperation leaking into his voice. I can fix this. Grace inhaled deeply, as if absorbing this moment. Then she met his gaze. But I can't. Nathaniel stilled. Her voice was unwavering. You only change when you realize you're about to lose me, Nathaniel. But love isn't something you only value when it's slipping through your fingers. She paused, letting the words settle. I waited for you for too long. And now I can't wait anymore. Silence engulfed them. Nathaniel felt the ground beneath him crumble. He had taken her presence for granted. He had assumed she would always be there. But now she wouldn't be. Grace turned away, walking toward the staircase. Nathaniel stood there, frozen, helpless, his hand clenching the wedding ring that no longer belonged to her. And this time, she was truly leaving. Chapter 7. The True Awakening. The Darkness of Emptiness. The door clicked shut behind Grace with a soft, almost gentle sound. But in Nathaniel's mind, it echoed like a death knell. She was gone. Not in the heat of an argument, not in a moment of anger that would eventually pass. This time, she had truly walked out of his life. The penthouse was empty. Nathaniel stood frozen in place, swallowed by the unbearable silence. He could hear the ticking of the clock, each second dragging on like a cruel taunt. No more familiar footsteps down the hallway. No more faint trace of her perfume in the air when she passed him. No more small figure curled up in her favorite armchair, engrossed in a book. Everything felt hollow. His eyes flickered around the room, as if searching for some trace of her. But nothing was out of place. Everything was as neat and perfect as ever. Except, she was no longer here. Nathaniel collapsed into a chair, gripping the divorce papers with trembling hands. His fingers tightened around the document, knuckles turning white. Divorce agreement. Her signature lay at the bottom. Neat, final. No demands, no conditions, no hesitation. She hadn't fought for money. She hadn't tried to claim assets. She hadn't even left him a note. She had simply walked away. Grace didn't want anything from him anymore. Not his wealth, not his power, not even an explanation. She had come to him for love, and now she was leaving for the same reason, because he had failed to cherish the love she had given him. Nathaniel had faced billion-dollar negotiations, high-stakes deals, and the crushing weight of corporate decisions. But he had no idea how to face this. He had always thought Grace would be there, that once his work settled, everything between them would naturally fall back into place, that love could survive without being nurtured. He had been so wrong. She hadn't left because she had stopped loving him. She had left because she was exhausted, and that was what crushed him the most. He hadn't lost her to another man. He hadn't lost her because of betrayal. He had lost her to himself. Nathaniel's gaze swept the apartment once more. The penthouse still gleamed with luxury, but it was no longer home. Without Grace, nothing mattered. Without Grace, it was just cold, lifeless walls. He reached out, touching the armchair where she used to sit. It was cold. He turned toward the door, half expecting her to walk back in. But she wouldn't. Not unless he did something. For the first time in his life, Nathaniel Sinclair felt true fear. He could lose her forever. Not for a day, not for a week. Forever. And in that moment, he finally understood. He could lose his company, his fortune, his entire empire. But nothing terrified him more than losing Grace. Chapter 8. The Letters She Never Sent. The penthouse had been empty for 3 days. Tonight, the vast space was swallowed by darkness, the only light coming from the distant glow of London's skyscrapers, filtering through the glass windows. Everything remained untouched. The luxurious furniture, the carefully arranged artwork, nothing had been disturbed. Except for one thing. Grace was no longer here. Nathaniel walked toward the bedroom, his steps heavy, as if the weight of the entire world pressed down on his shoulders. When he pushed the door open, emptiness greeted him like a crushing blow to his chest. The closet, empty. The vanity, bare. The bed they had once shared, cold and lifeless. She had taken everything, everything except the one thing that haunted him most, the memories. He saw her everywhere. In the armchair by the window where she used to curl up with a book on rainy nights. At the vanity where she would try on a new shade of lipstick, turning to him with a playful smile asking, "Does this color suit me?" On his side of the bed, where she used to reach for him in the cold, seeking warmth from the man she had once loved more than anything. But they were only shadows now, ghosts of what once was. Nathaniel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space beside him. How long had he been sitting there? Time felt meaningless. Then something caught his eye, a small wooden box tucked away on the bookshelf. A memory stirred. His heart pounded as he reached for it, dust clinging to his fingertips, a sign that it had been untouched for far too long. With hesitant fingers, he lifted the lid. Letters. Grace's letters. Letters he had never seen before. His hand trembled as he picked one up. The paper had yellowed slightly with time, but her delicate handwriting remained unmistakable. February 14th, 3 years ago. Today is our 3rd wedding anniversary. Do you remember? I planned a special dinner, but you texted me that you had an important meeting. I should be used to it by now, but I still hoped you'd come home early, just this once. Nathaniel gripped the letter tightly. He didn't remember that day. He only remembered a never-ending series of meetings, deals that consumed every hour. He had forgotten that she had waited for him. He had forgotten that she had hoped. Swallowing hard, he opened another. Grace's birthday, 2 years ago. It's my birthday today, but I suppose you forgot. I'm not angry. I bought my own cake, lit my own candles, and made my own wish. I wish that you would have time for me, but I guess that's too much to ask. Nathaniel felt like he couldn't breathe. How many birthdays had she spent alone? How many anniversaries had passed without him even noticing? And then, he found the letter that was most worn, the edges folded and unfolded countless times, as if she had read and rewritten it over and over, but never sent it. There was no date. I miss you, Nathaniel, but I don't know if you even miss me anymore. The room blurred before his eyes. His breathing turned shallow. How lonely had she been? How much had she loved him, only to be left in silence? Every word she wrote stabbed into his heart like a dagger, each one deeper than the last. She had spent years waiting for him, and he had never noticed. Nathaniel clenched the letters in his fists, his hands trembling. He had told himself that he had done everything for Grace, that his long hours, his relentless drive, his sacrifices were all for their future. But in the end, he had only built a future without her in it. And now she was gone. Now he was left with nothing but these letters and the suffocating darkness of regret. Nathaniel's gaze fell on the divorce papers still lying on the desk. His jaw clenched, his fingers curled into a fist. He couldn't sign them. He couldn't let her go. But he also knew words wouldn't bring her back. He had promised too much and delivered too little. This time, he had to prove it. This time, he would do whatever it took to bring her back. Even if it meant starting from nothing. Even if it meant making her fall in love with him all over again. Chapter 8. Begging for one last chance. The day Grace left. The London sky was heavier than usual, blanketed by thick gray clouds, foreshadowing the storm about to descend upon the city. At the airport, Grace walked toward the security checkpoint, her suitcase rolling smoothly behind her. Today, she was leaving London. She had prepared herself for this moment, a fresh start, a life unchained from the past, free from the lonely nights of waiting for a man who never came home. She had thought she would feel relief, yet deep inside something heavy still pressed against her heart. No matter how much she tried to deny it, she still loved Nathaniel. But love alone was no longer enough to keep her here. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, ready to step forward. But just as she was about to pass through security, a familiar voice echoed through the terminal. "Grace!" Her breath hitched. She turned around and froze. Nathaniel stood amidst the bustling crowd. No tailored suit, no distant, unreadable expression. He looked different. His eyes no longer held that unshakable arrogance, that quiet confidence he always carried. Instead, they were filled with desperation, with fear, as if he knew that if he didn't act now, he would lose her forever. "Before you go," he said, his voice rough, his chest rising and falling as if he had been running, "have dinner with me, one last time." A dinner from the past. Grace hesitated. She shouldn't make this harder. She had already decided. But when she saw the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet plea beneath his words, she found herself whispering, "Just one dinner." Nathaniel nodded. "Just one dinner." Nathaniel took her to a small restaurant by the Thames. The moment Grace stepped inside, her heart clenched. It was the place of their first date. The place where Nathaniel had once looked at her with pure adoration, held her hand, and promised he would protect her for the rest of his life. Memories flooded back like a tidal wave. They sat down at a small table by the window, overlooking the river. Nathaniel didn't say much, he just watched her, as if he were memorizing every detail. The way her lashes fluttered when she looked away, the way she toyed with the edge of her napkin, the way the candlelight reflected in her eyes. Grace sighed softly. "Nathaniel," she finally spoke, breaking the silence, "you don't have to do this. My decision is made." He was quiet for a moment before finally placing his hands on the table. "I know," he said. His voice was deep, steady. "I know you don't believe in me anymore." She looked away. "I know the changes I made before. They weren't real. They were temporary." His voice softened. "I changed because I was afraid of losing you, not because I truly understood what I had done." Her hands tightened under the table. "But Grace..." Nathaniel took a deep breath. Then slowly he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Grace's heart stopped. He opened it. Inside was a new ring. "I forgot how to love you." His voice wavered for the first time. "But if you let me, I'll learn again." Grace stared at him, stunned. She looked at the ring, then at him. For the first time, she saw not the powerful CEO, not the man who ruled boardrooms with ease, but a man who was simply asking for another chance. His hands, steady when signing billion-dollar contracts, were trembling. His voice, commanding in any negotiation, was pleading. "Grace," he said her name like a prayer. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I'm just asking you to give me a chance to make things right." Her heart wavered. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this time he truly understood. But could she? She clenched her hands, inhaling shakily. "Nathaniel," she whispered. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know you're afraid. I know you don't want to be hurt again." His voice turned raw, vulnerable. "But this time, I won't let that happen." She had never seen his hands shake before, never seen him shake before. She studied him for a long moment. Then without a word, she stood up and left. Nathaniel sat there frozen, the ring still in his hands. His heart plummeted. She had walked away. But as the hours passed, as his phone remained silent, one thing became clear. She had left the restaurant, but she hadn't gotten on the plane. Instead of heading to the airport, Grace returned to her apartment. She lay in bed all night, her mind racing through everything. She loved Nathaniel. She had always loved him, But love wasn't enough to erase the pain. It wasn't enough to restore the broken trust. Had he truly changed? Or was this just another desperate effort, only for her to fall back into the same cycle? Loneliness, disappointment, neglect. She couldn't go through that again, but at the same time she realized something else. She didn't just want to give Nathaniel a chance, she wanted to give herself a chance too. Nathaniel didn't pressure her for an answer. He didn't demand forgiveness, instead he acted. The next morning, Grace received a simple text from him. "I won't chase you, I won't beg, but if you let me, I will prove to you that this time, I'm truly different." She didn't reply, but Nathaniel didn't stop. He started prioritizing his life differently. He delegated most of his corporate responsibilities, trusting his team to run the company in his absence. No more late nights at the office. No more meetings that stretched until morning. For the first time in years, he made time for himself and for her. He began showing up at the cafe near her work, not to talk to her, not to beg, just to sit in the corner, reading a book, waiting for her to finish her day. One day she received a handwritten letter from him, the first one since their wedding. "Grace, I know you won't forgive me easily, and you shouldn't, but I won't stop trying. I will learn how to love you again, day by day, if you'll let me." Her heart wavered, but she still wasn't ready. Days passed, and slowly Grace began to notice. Nathaniel wasn't the same man anymore. He started calling her, not for work, not to ask anything of her, just to ask how her day had been. He began walking with her in the mornings, not saying much, just being there. No more missed messages, no more forgotten dinners. Nathaniel was learning how to put her first, and she couldn't ignore it. One morning she woke up to find a small note on her table, written in his familiar handwriting. "Today I'm taking you somewhere special. No work, no meetings. Just us." She smiled. She put on a simple dress and stepped outside. Nathaniel was waiting, not in a tailored suit, not as CEO Nathaniel Sinclair, but as just Nathaniel. His eyes held something she hadn't seen in years. Hope, a place they had forgotten. Nathaniel drove her to a small garden on a hill outside London. It wasn't grand, it wasn't lavish, but it was filled with memories. "This place," Grace whispered. Nathaniel nodded. "Where we once promised to build a future together." Grace felt her heart tighten. She had buried these memories, convinced they no longer mattered. But standing here now, she realized they still did. Nathaniel turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "I once forgot what was most important in my life." He took her hands in his, firm, steady, full of quiet devotion. "But this time I won't lose you again." Grace looked at him for a long time. She didn't need grand words. She didn't need empty promises. She just needed to see the change. And this time, she did. The true meaning of love. Love isn't just a feeling. Love is action. A relationship cannot survive if only one person fights for it. Neglect, whether intentional or not, kills love faster than any betrayal ever could. Success can never replace the moments you lose. And sometimes apologies come too late. Because happiness isn't in power, wealth, or ambition. It's in cherishing the one who loves you before it's too late. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.